Hi, Desi here with a stress buster for you. And last year I interviewed Dr. Earl Henslin, who wrote this book, This Is Your Brain on Joy. And so you're going to hear him talk to you about how stress affects your brain. So stay tuned. My name is Desi, and I'm the Attitude Adjuster.
Yeah, I've been spending the last 25 years doing what's called SPECT, S-P-E-C-T brain imaging, and working very closely with Dr. Daniel Amen. And we now have a database of over 150,000 brain scans, and Dr. Amen has published like over 40 research articles. So we've got a nice, solid scientific basis to what happens with the brain on stress. And in fact, to help show you, it would be good to go to the slides now so we can actually look at the brain and talk about it in terms of stress and what happens. Prefrontal cortex is that area right behind your forehead.
Okay.
And that has to do with attention, concentration, judgment, impulse control, forethought, and planning. And this is a scan of an individual who has, something we call like a drop in blood flow in the frontal cortex. And can you see this area I'm pointing to? Okay, that would be the prefrontal cortex. Just imagine rotating this top part forward, and that's right behind your forehead. And when we see a dropout in perfusion or blood flow right there, we know that person's going to have problems with attention, concentration, forethought, planning, follow through. So it would be hard for them to stay focused in the workplace when there's a stress response. And I just want to jump ahead to show you, one of the scans. Here we go. Because when you look at this scan, let me go one more. Yeah, here we go. There's the left and right basal ganglia. Can you see this one on your right where it looks like eyes?
Yeah.
That's what I mean by the basal ganglia. And that is the anxiety thermostat of the brain. And when that gets elevated, then people at work are going to have increased like neck and shoulder tension. They might be more vulnerable to headaches, or if they're in a really high stress work situation, that's the part of the brain that plays a role in panic attacks and just feeling overwhelmed to the point where it's just hard to focus and hard to concentrate. And that basal ganglia, when that's elevated like that, because the picture on the left, you see what is a normal basal ganglia. And that person is managing stress and they're doing well. And we can tell just by looking at the activity in that basal ganglia, like we would just know automatically that that person is going to have more trouble at work and at home with the stress that they're going through. Now, when you, because to me, the basal ganglia is the most neglected area of the brain in all of general medicine and psychiatry and psychology and so on. And because it influences really your whole body. And so when that anxiety center gets high, that's usually when adrenaline will kick in. And unfortunately, if a workplace is, high stress, well, that adrenaline leaves that person with that fight or flight kind of response. That's why some people, they can't wait to get out. Wait till 5 so they can get out of there, because it's just too intense and too stressful. And so, and over a period of years, that's when people can have chronic headache problems, or like the adrenaline, what we call a stress hormone called cortisol, has been running through the body enough. Well, then it starts to compromise the immune system. And so then when people get into their late 30s and 40s and 50s and so on, then all of a sudden they find themselves getting more vulnerable to catching any bug that's going around. when the immune system's healthy, well, then you're not vulnerable to that. People can get the flu or get a cold, but you won't get it because your immune system is strong enough, that it fights those things off.
Mm-hmm. Now, didn't you talk about in another conversation with me that the cortisol is like what you call it, a death hormone? What did you call that?
Death hormone. Yeah.
Death hormone, because it's a pretty serious situation when you keep that cortisol circulating in your system, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. You got it, Desi. And that's why your Stress Busters program is really important, because people need to do things daily and throughout the day that are life-giving, to balance out the adrenaline and the stress of the day. Looking for opportunities to take a break, to walk around, to laugh at something, or maybe grab a few minutes to spend some time in meditation or a deeply relaxed state, because that offsets the stress response and helps calm that basal ganglia down, so a person isn't staying in that intense and automatic fight or flight response. And so that is kind of key. Now, when you look at the bottom of that brain scan, see that red at the bottom there?
Yes.
Okay, that's called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is a region in the brain. It's like right at the base of the skull here, that responds when we move. It's like we get up and walk around, or when you go for a quick walk, or you stop at the gym and go and work out, like say on an elliptical trainer. Have you ever noticed when you're working out or doing a long walk, then all of a sudden you'll get more ideas and thoughts. And all of a sudden a solution to a problem will pop in. Well, that's because the cerebellum, as we're exercising, improves the blood flow in the frontal cortex, which is that executive part of the brain, and that's the one we're relying on with work all day long. And several years ago, I had a young man call me up. He wanted to meet with me to get some ideas about how to grow his business. And so I was just assuming it was going to be your normal breakfast or lunch meeting. And he said to me, how about if we have a walking meeting? And I said, fine. And so we actually met at a trail not too far from my home, where it's like 5:30 in the morning, and we went on this long walk. We were walking for 6-7 miles, and it was so fascinating. The more we walked, that because when the cerebellum is active, it improves the blood flow up here. It's like that's a natural way of using Ritalin or enhancing dopamine. It's just exercise. And so we came up with some really solid plans and some solid ideas, because they just kept coming as we talked, because we're keeping that front part of the brain alive. So it was a highly productive time. That's why, with, people, now when, because I do some executive coaching along with counseling and so on. And I'll encourage some of these executives to take their vice presidents or managers, if they're going to have a meeting, to maybe go for a walk in the area there. Walk and talk, because when we're walking, the cerebellum, the movement lowers that anxiety center, and that helps balance things in the brain, so there's just better blood flow throughout the whole brain. Now, the sides of the brain, the temporal lobes, which would be, like in this area right here, in this area right here, they have a lot to do with memory. And in order to get, like, say, new information in, or to retrieve information, you got to have good nerve conductivity and good blood flow from the frontal cortex all the way down to the temporal lobes. Just imagine the temporal lobes there's like a medial temporal lobe is something called the retrorenal cortex, which is just like a little doorway where the information goes down a series of steps to the hippocampus, which is like the hard drive of your computer. So if you want to get new information in, or be able to retrieve that information, you got to have good perfusion or blood flow all the way through to make that happen. And that's why managing stress is so important, because as this anxiety center goes up, well, then a person can start to feel overwhelmed. They maybe will start to second guess themselves and overanalyze a project or problem they're working on, and they have a harder time, making a choice or making a decision. So the stress gets higher, the longer it's going to take, or they're going to be more likely to make mistakes. Because some people, instead of overanalyzing, they won't think enough, and so they'll end up making a choice or decision that really isn't that good for the whole project or whatever the task is they're working on.